My name is Robert Dinwiddie. Okay. My middle name is Stewart. Most people call me Stu. I have a history with this site going back to 1993 when I was with the Hazardous Waste Bureau in Santa Fe. I ended up being promoted to the program manager, and I wrote the nasty NOD declaring it insufficient for their monitoring plan, for their corrective measures study. And I also told them that the unit is a regulated unit under the law because it was in operation in 1982 receiving hazardous waste and continued to operate until December of 1988. In September of '86, it had not filed the necessary paperwork with the US EPA or the New Mexico Environment Department to retain interim status. Interim status is statutory. Once a law or regulation is passed, bringing that unit under RCRA, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, it is interim status. It has a, what we call drop dead date, that they have to file a Part A declaring hazardous waste operations at that site. Sandia failed to do that, so it lost interim status. Because it lost interim status and was a regulated unit receiving waste after the effective date for landfills, it must then close under 264. And the difference between interim status closure is little or no chance of release from the unit under interim status, or under 264, which is the permitted unit, absolutely no chance of release. I'm sorry, there's been releases from this unit past the point of compliance, which is defined as the bottom of the pit and the vertical sides of the pits. We've had tritium releases, we've had cesium releases, we've had metals releases. Therefore, if they go through the Solid Waste Management Unit corrective action, they must mediate or remove those releases. And Sandia has been recalcitrant in doing that. MED has been recalcitrant in ordering them to meet the requirements of the regulations to protect the releases. Granted, it's never going to be clean clothes. It's in the middle of a sewer. But it needs to be addressed and as much cleanup as possible. I'm being told I have 30 seconds. Thank you.
6 Albuquerque 87196. Citizen Action is requesting that the long-term monitoring and maintenance plans be retracted by the New Mexico Environment Department. We request a full evidentiary public hearing for the LTMMP for the plan in any event. We ask that MED stay the issuance of the plan until 1, Sandia Labs has corrected the inaccurate record for groundwater monitoring, and 2, until there is compliance with the 2005 final order for Sandia to perform a 5-year review that was due in 2010 and has now been delayed for 3 years. We contend that the extension for the performance of the 5-year review contained in the long-term monitoring and maintenance plan for an additional 5 years beyond the approval date of the plan is not provided for in the final order. It's the result of secret meetings and emails between the New Mexico Environment Department and Sandia Labs that violate the New Mexico Open Meetings Act and violates public participation requirements of the Hazardous Waste Management Act and requires a level 3 permit modification proceeding with prior opportunity for public comment and a public hearing. I happen to be an attorney. I'm an expert in RCRA law. I understand the public participation laws. All I can tell you is that from the very beginning, there has been regulatory issues with this that violate hazardous waste laws. The first thing that I'd like to point out, and Dr. Dinwiddie touched on it, was that the mixed waste landfill is a regulated unit that has a technical meaning that requires a certain type of monitoring network to be imposed. It requires a closure plan and a post-closure plan. It requires a clean closure if they don't have the necessary documents in place, which they never did. And it was improperly designated as a solid waste management unit, lovingly referred to as SHMOOS, back in '93 by the Environmental Protection Agency. And in 1997, Dr. Dinwiddie, who was in charge of permits, told them that it was a regulated unit and they needed to have a closure plan and a post-closure plan, and that was never done. No reliable groundwater monitoring network has ever been in place to monitor the groundwater beneath the dump. Throughout the 1990s, there were numerous technical reports, including from the New Mexico Environment Department, the EPA, Region 6, the Oversight Bureau run by Mr. Skibitsky at one point. There were documents from the Department of Energy that were critical about the groundwater monitoring network. They all knew that the monitoring network wells were put in the wrong locations. They learned that instead of the groundwater flow being to the northwest, it was to the south-southwest. That meant their background well, two of their down gradient wells were all in the wrong place. They knew the wells had corroded screens and were contaminated by bentonite clay. I'm going to skip over quite a bit of material to get to the year 2007. Robert Gilkison and Citizen Action had filed a complaint with the EPA Region 6 that the monitoring network was defective. And during this period in time, there were several things going on that were quite important. The dirt cover had not been put in place. There was a lawsuit regarding the cover that was ongoing. The fate and transport model for the mixed waste landfill had not yet been approved, and the corrective measures implementation plan had not been approved. Now, in 2007, the Region 6 EPA took a look at our complaint. We were told they were going to do a technical review. They never did they never did provide that technical review until this year, 2012, after Citizen Action filed a lawsuit to obtain those documents. Those documents reveal substantial knowledge that the groundwater monitoring network as of 2007 was quite defective. I want to read to you the kind of nonsense that was going on with the EPA and the Environment Department at that time. This is from one of the interviews of the Inspector General with one of the staff people at NMED. His name is deleted. He stated that he did not have any prior connection with the site. In fact, he does not report to name deleted. He also stated that Region 6 had its results preconceived. Region 6 management did not want NMED doing anything wrong. Therefore, management created a structure to ensure the appropriate outcome would result. Furthermore, as the writing and draft comments progressed to a final letter, the team was pushed more and more to agree with NMED's position. He also stated that the team's initial evaluation would have changed the solution at Sandia Mixed Waste Landfill, the solution being the dirt cover. NMED pushed extremely hard for EPA Region 6 not to even question the past results or the viability of past test results. The test results being from the groundwater monitoring network. Finally, he stated that citizen action got shortchanged by Region 6. Now, the reason that we have to have a public hearing on the long-term monitoring maintenance plan is because of these kind of shenanigans that have gone on now for almost 2 decades. We need an opportunity to put in the record exactly what the regulators knew, when they knew it, and the fact that they knew they had a defective groundwater monitoring network. They knew that effective groundwater monitoring was providing fraudulent data, basically, if you were going to use that to make a decision. So the decision that they made for the dirt cover was not based on a realistic appraisal of what was in the groundwater and what had been released from the dump. This also goes to the fate and transport model. Now, the fate and transport model was being discussed while NMED and EPA had this information going back forth and had known about it going back another 10 years. So all of this information was kept secret from the public. The EPA Inspector General did a report in 2010 that addressed the EPA Region 6 conduct. They said Region 6 staff took inappropriate steps to keep the details of the monitoring well assessments from the public, decided not to provide documentation, sometimes not to document their concerns. The region's actions are a violation of EPA's public involvement policy. Yes. Additionally, the EPA Region 6 placed a confidential stamp on the technical report that they wrote. We just got this about a month ago as a result of the lawsuit. And it agrees with all kinds of concerns that we had, but they kept this from us and the public from 2007, okay? 5 years. This was withheld. The Inspector General stated that Region 6 withheld information from the public regarding the MWL monitoring wells through discontinuation of record keeping, misleading communications, and inappropriate classification for national security of that report that I just showed you. In 2004, there was a public hearing, and the public didn't have the information about the defective groundwater monitoring wells. What was presented to the hearing officer was that there was no evidence of contamination to the groundwater. Well, if you had defective groundwater monitoring wells, how could you provide evidence of contamination to the groundwater? They might as well have been monitoring on the far side of the moon for the defective information that they were presenting. Now, it's a violation of federal law not to correct the record when it's wrong at any time during a hazardous waste management type of permit. The record has never been corrected for the mixed waste landfill, including all of these documents that I recently received from the EPA and the earlier criticisms, which were made in notices of deficiencies, notices of disapproval for over 8 years in the early 90s. So I submit that the New Mexico Environment Department needs to reopen this entire matter, allow some honesty and air to come into the process, and allow the public to have real participation in the decision making for this matter.
What I'm going to do is go to page 7 in the presentation and start with the Notice of Deficiency report written by New Mexico Environment Department in 1998 about monitoring well MWL MW4. This monitoring well is posted on the map that's up here. The well is here. The long-term monitoring and maintenance plan says that this well is not currently to be sampled for contamination in the formal operations. It is for, they said, the vague term information only. Well, there's very, very important information as presented on this map. I'm going to read from the 1998 notice of disapproval. The top of the upper screen of well MW4 is located approximately 22 feet below the water table. Because of the vertical gradient and the way the well is constructed, well 4 is of no value for determining the elevation of the water table and therefore the horizontal direction of groundwater flow and the horizontal gradient. Continuing from the report. Also, because the top of the upper screen is located 22 feet below the water table, the well is of little value for detecting any groundwater contamination that may be present in the saturated zone just below the water table. The important thing is this map presents the well now to be able to map the water table, when in 1998 the water table was 20 feet below the bottom of the screen. Excuse me, 20 feet above the top of the screen. So this map doesn't make sense to the physical situation. The blue lines on this map are the elevations of the water table. This well MW4 in 1998, the water table was greater than 20 feet above the top of the screen. The water level has declined on record over the last 18 years at a rate of approximately a half a foot a year. So that regular decline of the water table would take it down about 8 feet at the location of well MW4. But this map presents that the top of the screen is now above the water table, and they're using this well to map the elevation of the water table. That physically doesn't work. But the report, the long-term monitoring and maintenance plan, also says that they are not now doing collecting of water samples for purposes of detecting contamination at this well 4. So the other important information that's on this flow map that is the surface of the water table is that the direction of groundwater flow on the map flows down gradient perpendicular to the flow lines. So this map shows, in fact, we take this flow line and go perpendicular to the gradient. I'm tracking a groundwater flow line down gradient. This whole area of the landfill is not monitored. All of this groundwater flow is off to the north, and these are the compliance monitoring wells on the west side of the dump. 7, 8, and 9. So this is the classified area of the landfill where the early disposal operations occurred, and all parties recognize that the waste disposed of in the classified area are of greatest concern for being released from the landfill to groundwater. It's not monitored by their own map. Of course, the other problem
Tracy, you said that a little bit closer, thanks.
The other problem is that the flow map is not accurate to the elevation of the water table. These three wells along the western side of the landfill have 30-foot long screens. And the very bottom of those screens entered into a permeable zone, much higher permeability than the rest of the screen. So that the deep water level represented in these new wells is not accurate for the elevation of the water table. More of this will be discussed in the presentation I prepared. Thank you.
Hi folks, Ron Zuziak, 1520 Gerard, Albuquerque. Just to bore you briefly, my background is I'm an educated chemist. I have a BS in chemistry. I'm a chemical engineer also. I have a master's degree in biochemistry. For the past 45 years I've been an industrial chemist, and about 15 years, the last 15 years, I've been in the mining part of this game. And the reason why I bring this up is because if you're in the mining business, and I've been a mining consultant for many years, you have to get permitted for any mining operation. The biggest part, one of the biggest parts of any mining operation permit is to make sure that you have liners that line the waste part, the landfill part, the water waste part, tailings ponds, tailing parts, to prevent anything from reaching anything in the water system whatsoever, the water table. It's unconscionable to me that these folks who claim to be experts would say that only they would need be this biointrusion layer, which is a dirt layer, and be nothing underneath to protect it. And there are many types of liners that can be put in there, even to protect against radioactive waste. So that's an unconscionable thing as far as I'm concerned, in my professional opinion. And it should be added that this should be part of the thing is the review, as Dave McCoy suggests, that we look at and we present in an open public review so that this thing can be properly addressed and covered. Thank you.
I consulted for over 20 years with the national laboratories, both Sandia and Los Alamos, in fate and transport of radioactive nuclear waste and management therein. And I was on the CAB that preceded at least two major reviews that DOE sponsored on mixed waste landfill. I was on the WERC review, the first review that they had, which involved experts from throughout the state. They followed up, DOE paid for this, followed up.
Could you put the microphone just a little closer?
Yes, DOE, thank you. It's much better, isn't it? DOE followed up with a second review in which I participated in, but was not a member, of external reviewers from experts from throughout the country. And I think it's important to know and make this point, is in the beginning when we were at the CAB level and talking to Sandia engineers, environmental engineers and so on, it was their full intent that the mixed waste landfill would be excavated. And then in the process, over a number of years, not too many, Sandia Corporation management made a decision that they were only going to do what was legally necessary. When we had our public hearing that was documented by the hearing officer, there were more attorneys from Sandia, that they had hired an attorney firm, than there were scientists represented by Sandia. So you ask why they're not removing the waste. It's a decision by Sandia. I spoke to the very high officials in DOE in Washington, and they said it's up to the state of New Mexico to make that call. It's not a money call on the part of DOE with regard to the removal of that waste. I did want to correct one point too, and then go on and talk a little bit about the contamination out there. Bruce had mentioned that tritium was an important species, and it is. It's tritiated water, and it's mobile, but there's a slight correction. It does indeed have a 12.3 half-life, but today the concentration of tritium at the mixed waste land site is 10 times what it was a decade ago and down to greater depths. It has not gone away. There are species, 119 drums containing various levels of plutonium. I think we're all pretty aware of plutonium. It has a 24,000-year half-life. And 119 55-gallon drums are placed and documented and photographed as being put into the mixed waste landfill. As part of the review committee, we had access to Sandia's best estimate of the different materials, not so much on how much of the different materials, they didn't know, but just as an example, I think many of you have heard of depleted uranium. It's in the tons of depleted uranium. So there was a list of over 100 radioactive and carcinogenic organics, chlorinated solvents to be specific, on that list. That list is available. I'm sure it's in the WERC report that you can get from one of the repositories. I can assure you that of the toxicity of that material, of those materials. Definitely a highly toxic situation. The argument, two arguments that Sandia made with regard to discussions with the panel that was doing the review was that there was no location for the mixed waste. It couldn't be put anywhere. There were certain components that could not be put anywhere. I happen to know the director at that time for WHIP. I spoke with her. She's in headquarters in DOE. She assured me that there were locations between WHIP and the facility up in Utah, in Salt Lake, that could handle all of the mixed waste that's out there at the mixed waste land site. So that was a bogus argument. The second argument that they put forth was that the radioactivity and the material out there was too dangerous to be excavated. Bruce referred to that. That's bogus. Up at INEL, up in Idaho, they have removed much higher levels and much more extensive. This is only 2.6 acres, 20 feet deep of material. And that has been done in a variety of ways. We won't go into the details. Some of it's robotic. But we have tremendous instrumentation now and ability to measure radioactivity at very low levels, and really no need to expose people to extraordinary levels of radiation. So that's a bogus argument. The arguments that they put forth at that time, that there was no place to put the waste and that it was too dangerous to handle, are both bogus at this point in time. So the conclusion of the committee, of which I wrote some of the words, and some of the words were used here, was this idea of imminent danger. Well, one of the concerns was in using that word, and we had a different interpretation of that, was tomorrow, is somebody in Albuquerque going to drink some water that's radioactive? And that's not going to happen. That's not tomorrow, but it is imminent. It definitely is, without question, going to hit the groundwater. I've worked in the rad waste business for 20 years. I've looked at the transport, fate and transport at Los Alamos. I've worked in former East Germany, where the USSR extracted half of its uranium. I've worked in Sweden and various locations, and I can assure you that the waste will indeed transport. And as I quoted with the tritium, it is indeed expanding. The concentration is higher. Well, why is it higher? Well, initially, Sandia containerized all of the waste that they put in. Look at the pictures. Go back to the WERC report, and you'll see that they were put in plastic metal, etc. containers. Those containers are now degrading, and they're now exposing continuously more waste than they did initially. So I guess in conclusion, what I want to say is that the intent of both of those review boards were that there would be a 5-year review and that Sandia would come up with a plan during each of those reviews to excavate and properly dispose of that waste.
Hello, my name is Henry Misterville. I reside at 24 Matisse Road in Albuquerque. Actually, I live in Massachusetts as well as in Albuquerque. And I'm very interested in this subject. The evidence suggests the critical information that should have compelled NMED to order the removal of radioactive and hazardous waste has not been met. Mr. David McCoy, one of the foremost attorneys on radioactive and hazardous waste in the Southwest, through a private records request, has transcripts of secret meetings and emails between Sandia and NMED to modify the final order without alerting the public. This is a violation of state and federal law, and they continually do that, Sandia Labs as well as NMED. Sandia Labs and NMED, the EPA, they all conspired to deceive the public by misclassifying the dump from being a regulated unit to a solid waste management unit, SMOOS. And thereby, by doing that, they were able to avoid the strict standards for monitoring and cleanup. The former chief of the Hazardous Waste Bureau and RCRA permits manager, the esteemed Dr. Robert S. Dinwiddie, who spoke initially, he denied Sandia Labs permission for no cleanup status, citing federal RCRA law, since the dump received radioactive and toxic waste after July of 1982. Coincidentally, Dr. Dinwiddie was summarily replaced after issuing his order by the new chief, John Biazzi of the Hazardous Waste Bureau. And the unit was named the Solid Waste Management Unit, which meant that it did not have to comply with strict federal guidelines. That is the current case today. Sandia Labs never planned on removing these toxic and radioactive wastes from a city that is 1 mile from a children's playground and 1 mile from a planned community, Mesa del Sol, a 35,000 member community. How many minutes? I have 2, thank you. Because Sandia Labs never removed these contaminants, this is what we have. We have no liner under the landfill to prevent waste from entering the aquifer. We have no way of collecting leachate collection. These are toxic waste that leak from the dump. We only have a dirt cover, which they call a bio intrusion layer between the groundwater and the dump. We have evidence of contamination 120 feet below the dump that has spread horizontally off-site. Some of these identifiable contaminants, chromium, nickel, nitrates, cadmium, beryllium, tritium, exist. So all that Sandia Labs and all that NMED has done, they have not protected the public at all. They are suspect. Sandia Labs has a very sordid history as a result. William Rhodes, who is now the geologist for NMED, who is in charge of the approval process, he stated that the monitoring, Bob Gilkerson indicated to him, who was the chief hydrologist for Los Alamos, that the wells were misplaced. They had corrosive screens, which hid evidence of contamination, and they used bentonite clay, which absorbs contamination. The evidence is actually bogus, the evidence that the labs has presented. He ignored these facts. And EPA Region 6, under federal law, also stated that the dirt cover was not only inadequate, but was not protecting the public. William Oates, his wife, is also on the payroll of Sandia Labs. So he should remove himself from any decision-making process as a result. Would anybody else like to cede their time? I have one more
I'd
thing
like
to
to
say.
take my time. My name is Susan Rodriguez.
Thank you. So since his wife is on the payroll at Sandia Labs, his approval of the dirt cover gives the appearance of a conflict of interest, and his findings in favor of Sandia Labs should be overruled. And yet he remains the main contact person who will advise NMED on the long-term monitoring and maintenance plan. Sandia Labs never intended to remove these contaminants, but we must force them and our environmental agencies to honor their mission in protecting the public. And those who lied, those who concealed information, those who violated federal and state law by not holding public hearings must be held accountable. The public trust and safety has been seriously compromised. The public needs a thorough and independent investigation, perhaps with the involvement of the Inspector General of the EPA. Every federal agency has an Inspector General as oversight, since Sandia Labs, NMED, EPA Region 6 have lost their credibility in protecting the public health and safety of the citizens. The public needs a full evidentiary hearing, which means that we, the public, can present independent, unbiased testimony, professional testimony on this, so that Sandia Labs is forced to begin the removal process of radioactive and toxic waste before the wells are forever contaminated, like the wells in the South Valley, contaminated by GE, Chevron, and others. Once they're gone, they're gone. And I also want to thank the members of the Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority Board for hosting this presentation. And I would hope that, that the Department of the Environment would not allow the approval of this process, but that the public will have the right to have an evidentiary hearing, because we have not fully been heard. Thank you.